With Josh Taylor and Matt Barnes out the door, the Red Sox are interested in some left-handed relief options.
You are Locked On Red Sox, your daily Boston Red Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I want to welcome you back into the Locked On Red Sox podcast, and thank you so much for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. I am your host, Jake Ignaszewski, here as always with my co-host, NESN's Lauren Willand. And it's pretty interesting looking back at our last episode. We were really speaking about some different signings that the Red Sox have had, and then out of nowhere, the Matt Barnes report came, and it always seems like that happens where we hit record, something happens. But the thing that I found most interesting was to hear Chaim Bloom's sort of explanation of why everything played out. And that's one thing that, in the moment, it was something that wasn't expected whatsoever. No real whispers about it or anything like that. But especially with where the Red Sox are in the offseason, some of these 40-man roster moves could be some surprises, and, we could continue to see more down the line.
Yeah, I mean, we knew a move was coming because you had to get Adam Duvall on the roster after you made his deal official. But Matt Barnes was probably the last person I was expecting. You have, we've talked about it. It's Ryan Brazier, the Caleb Orts that are still on this roster. And the excuses or the reasons that Chaim Bloom gives to continue to keep Brazier on the roster just don't really make a whole lot of sense. It was just, I still think it's a bizarre move. I mean, whatever. I'm not going to sit here. I'm not like super mad at it. I'm not like, this was the stupidest move they could have made. They've made a lot of head scratching moves all off season when it comes in terms of the DFAs. But I still it's just baffling because you have other people who I'm surprised have made it this far. And like you said, it still could come. There's definitely still more to come. And then, of course, you have the spring training, the cuts, the roster cuts there. So, I mean, it really looks like Ryan Brazier and Caleb Ort will be on this roster, but there's still time. We have a few more weeks here until pitchers and catchers start to report down to Fort Myers.
I think the number one thing that was most surprising was the money on the table with Barnes getting, $7-8 million over this next season. And then when you also, on the same exact day when the Barnes DFA move happened, Josh Taylor, another bullpen arm, being shipped out for the shortstop Mondesi from the Royals. And, when you really look at the Red Sox current payroll situation, they have a projected player payroll of $192 million. That leaves them with $14 million left shy of the 233 sort of threshold that they would be over the luxury tax. And especially with the expectations that this team has, most people would expect them to stay under the luxury tax. So then they don't have to sort of pay those penalties like they had to last year if they're not going to legitimately compete. And, that's one thing that is sort of confusing now with them looking to sign some of these left-handed relief options on the free agency market to go and use some of that money that they're still going to have to pay Matt Barnes to potentially play for another team. Or one thing that somebody else brought up that I hadn't thought of is, maybe they DFA him and then sign him to a minor league deal, but I just don't get it.
No, and I wonder if due to his service time, if he can reject going to the minors, if he says, or if they say, hey, like, we're going to sign you to a minor league deal with the, the option to come to spring training. It's likely you're going to make the roster kind of thing. Maybe, but I feel like they've burned their bridge with Matt Barnes. He was retweeting some things on Twitter that was, questionable of why the Red Sox would DFA him. I don't know if he unretweeted it. This was right after it happened, so I never went back to look. But yeah, I mean, with the money thing, they're going to have to pay him, and it's likely they'll release him because I doubt they'll be able to trade him. And we're coming up now. We're going to find out soon enough, and I guarantee it'll be right after we hit stop on record. But it's weird. And you mentioned the relievers that they've had interest in. They've reportedly checked in on, like we've heard all offseason with other players, but it's just it's just another move that makes you question the direction of this team, because there's no direction, and we're not really getting any answers to what the direction is other than, oh, we want to be competitive.
Right. And that's the consistent sort of word that keeps on being used, is being in the race, staying competitive. And also, I thought it was very interesting to hear Heim's sort of explanation for this. He mentioned the conversation itself was one of the most difficult ones he's had. And then he also, sort of alluded to what Matt Barnes has brought to this organization over his time. Obviously, a homegrown talent. He said everybody on this call knows what his accomplishments are, how much he's meant to this organization. And, obviously talked about it many times over the years, how I feel about him and how highly I regard him, Bloom said. And he said, I think it gets to be looking with everybody else that we have on this roster. And, he also talked a little bit about why keeping Brazier over Barnes. And he said in the case of Brazier, who obviously has been through some ups and downs, but finished the season really strong and showed a lot that when you project it out ahead, it's really encouraging. And that's one thing. They love to look at the nitty gritty numbers, but, when you look at August, just the base numbers of his ERA, a 9.75 ERA in August over 14 games. And then if you want to sort of say his 1.80 ERA over 11 games in September is really going to, change your decision making for Brazier over Barnes, I just don't really get it, because when you look at his month by month, he had a few months, I believe it was April and May, that, were relatively good, in the 2.50 ERA sort of range. But then when you saw the remainder of the months, it was, 7, 8, 10 ERAs, and he was just never really consistent down the line.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. He never was consistent. And we've seen flashes, and he hasn't been bad 100% of the time, but a lot of the time he has been. And it's just, I mean, I'm not making these decisions. I'm not in on these meetings. I'm not hearing the reasons, and maybe it's completely different than what they're saying, but it still does not make a whole lot of sense if you want to look at the nitty gritty and this and that, because I said it last week that if I have to choose between Matt Barnes or Ryan Brazier in a tight game, not ideal, but after last year, yes, Ryan Brazier had a good final month, but Matt Barnes had a longer, bigger stretch, and I just felt like he would be more reliable, and he was able to kind of find his groove. I would go with Matt Barnes 99% of the time.
Yeah, I agree. And, now they're starting to look at another Matt in Matt Moore, who, interestingly enough, was a top prospect for the Tampa Bay Rays, in 2012, 2013. And it's interesting also looking back that he was ranked number 1. Bryce Harper was 2 and Mike Trout was 3. That's something that I will never get over. But he started to really struggle in the wake of his 2014 Tommy John surgery. And then from 2015 to 2018, had multiple years with a 5+ ERA, then barely pitched in 2019, went to Japan in 2020, and then finally returned to the majors with the Philadelphia Phillies for 2 seasons and really struggled, but really found his stride last season, signing a minor league deal with the Rangers, and sort of reinvented himself as a power arm out of the bullpen. And boy, did that really work out, pitching 74 innings, posting a stellar 1.95 ERA with a 2.98 FIP. And he's somebody that is very interesting, coming off of a season where he really reinvented himself. But to me, I sort of think, is that semi a fluke? Are batters going to figure out what really made him successful last year? Sort of reminds me of like a Michael Wacha situation, where he has an incredible season after some really questionable years prior.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably arguably one of the better free agent relievers on the market right now, and he would make sense for the Red Sox, and I think that they'd be able to get him fairly cheap. He's had such a weird journey, or an interesting journey through baseball. Like you said, you talked about it. He spent most of his, or the last 10 or so years as a starter, and he battled a lot of inconsistency. And like you mentioned, he was a top prospect. So you're expecting a lot out of someone who is a top prospect. And Tommy John surgery, and between that, the inconsistencies, and he was able to reinvent himself out of the bullpen, which was really nice to see. I like Matt Moore. I think that he's been a lot of fun to watch over the last however many years he's been in the league. But I really, really would like to see him on the Red Sox. Because they reportedly checked in, I was like, that's probably means here we go, the interest kings, just doing their jobs, just making sure, hey, how's it going? All right, we checked in. But in 2022, I think if you want to look at, not that we want to look at negatives, but when you look at the numbers, they look great. But he did struggle with his control, the walks, and that's the last thing that the Red Sox need, right? We saw that so many times last year that it was a lot of command and control issues and a lot of walks, just so many walks, walk after walk. But I think that despite that he's earned himself a big league deal. And I think that it would be a great fit for the Red Sox. So, and you look at someone like Matt Strahm, he got a 2-year deal. You'd think Matt Moore would get something around that. I think Matt Strahm has 15 million. So you would think around that, but just like we talked about, they could have spent that money on Matt Barnes, but Matt Moore is, like I said, he would be a good fit. And I do think that he would be helpful to this bullpen, but hopefully that the bullpen pieces, that would add a little bit of consistency to the relievers, get that opportunity to kind of show that they can be relied on and trusted in higher leverage situations.
And you talked about that control and, that inconsistency and which correlated to a lot of walks. And, it really shows in his walks per nine, 4.62, and especially as a reliever over 9 innings. You never want to see a guy, almost throw 5 walks in a game. The K per 9, relatively impressive, 10.09. But that's one thing that I sort of found curious, when looking at some of these different options that the Red Sox were looking at currently on the free agent market in terms of relievers. Majority of these guys are older than 32, going into, age 33, 34. And so
walking miracles, they call them.
and it really is interesting, seeing sort of what, in my mind, Chaim Bloom sort of explained how he wanted, the future Red Sox teams to look like, young, athletic, the ability to, have controllable arms for long periods of time. And, this team continues to get older and older. You could look at it as plus in terms of being able to mentor some of the younger guys, the experience, being able to have that veteran presence in the clubhouse. Then you could also look at it in the factor of, could cause injury concerns, also, how sustainable will they be if you give them a 2-year deal? And, that's one thing you mentioned it, Matt Moore, not really looking like a hefty cost, a market value of $3.3 million from SpecTrack. They project him to get a 2-year and $6.7 million deal. And so that's something that I would definitely be very interested in, especially if you're able to get him at a price point like that. And, I pointed the question to some of you guys, and you seem to agree with this. We got Red Sox Express. He says, seems like he's a yes, but who knows in 2023.
Yes.
Then we got Steve Rosenheimer. He said just yes. And then we got Rip Home Run Cart. Absolutely. And then an interesting one from Timothy Wilding. He said they should, but they won't. So curious to see if they actually do pull the trigger and what sort of price point that they're able to get. Because, Barnes coming off of a minor league deal, definitely looking to, utilize that impressive 2022 season to cash in.
Yeah, I think that, like I said, I think yes, they should, but they won't. Like, that's just like, and that's the general feeling around any Red Sox potential target, right? Like, they're like, oh yeah, like they should, it would make so much sense for them, but they just won't. But if he comes cheap, and like you said, Matt Moore is coming off that minor league deal, and I think he's, like I said, I think he's earned it. I think he's earned a major league deal. Whether that's going to be with the Red Sox or not remains to be seen. I'm pretty sure Mass Live said that they're not close, but I mean, that doesn't mean that it can change. That won't change overnight. There was some other names thrown around as well. Zack Britton is another one. I don't know if he would be I honestly don't really know what he could bring to this team. Maybe it's what Matt Moore could bring to this team. But I think when you look at who's on the market and who's left on the market, it's slim pickings, but Matt Moore just seems to make the most sense. Does he make the most sense to the Red Sox and the people who make those decisions? time will only tell, right? Like that's how what I always say, like, oh, we'll soon find out. And usually we find out that it's not going to happen because that's just how it's been going. And that's how, like one of our listeners said, that's how 2023 is going, but you never know. We never know what can happen.
Exactly. And, especially really looking at, where we are on the calendar, when you start to get, 2 to 3 weeks close to spring training, and so we look at some of these guys that the Red Sox are interested in, there's a reason why they're still in the free agency market, whether it's, their teams have question marks, maybe it's the price point is a little bit too hefty for teams wanting to be comfortable to go and sign them. But who knows really what the reasoning is. But, we're going to go into some more players that the Red Sox could potentially be interested in our second segment. Before we do that, I just want to take a second to talk to you about FanDuel. So this year, the only app you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. We are really excited about our brand new sports betting partner for Locked On because they are the #1 sports book in America. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. Download FanDuel now so you can bet Super Bowl 57 with no sweat first bet. You'll get to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown. You can even bet on some of the games, going into before the Super Bowl week, like the NBA, the NHL as well. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Best of all, you can get paid winnings instantly. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So, now looking at some of the other options outside of Matt Moore that the Red Sox could potentially look towards, one guy in Andrew Chafin, who recently pitched for the Tigers, they have not been in contact with him due to what has been reported as a loftier price. Makes sense, especially with him declining a player option of $6.5 million, especially if he declines it. You would expect him to look towards $7 to maybe $8 million. And, the numbers that he was able to output this past season in Detroit definitely points to maybe a heftier price. 57 frames of 2.83 ERA ball with a 27.6 strikeout rate and a 7.8% walk percentage. But this would definitely be a great addition for the Red Sox bullpen, but I think a little bit too expensive.
Yeah, and like Matt Moore, him and Matt Moore are probably the two better relievers that are left on the market without a deal at the time that we're recording this. And I do think he'd be a little more expensive than Matt Moore, and I think that's part of what makes Matt Moore a better fit for the Red Sox. But I do think he's also a good fit, Andrew Chafin. And I think that if you do want to have some sort of direction with this team, because I feel like the bullpen is one of the lesser worries going into 2023, which is crazy to think about when we talked about last year in 2022. But I like this fit a lot, and I think he will understandably and rightfully have more money coming his way. And I think that the Red Sox will be priced out of him because they don't want to spend that much on a reliever, even though they had 5 lefties last year, and the 5 lefties they had last year are all off this roster. So you kind of need to replenish that. And he would be a good fit. I like him. I'd want him over Matt Moore, but I'm certainly not going to complain if the Red Sox actually go after and successfully get somebody that they are interested in.
And it's interesting that you say that, because if there was like word indicator, if there was a count of what sort of position group we talked about negatively the most over the last year or two, it is the bullpen. Probably number 2 would be the rotation, but the bullpen is something that hasn't been a sure thing for a long time. And, especially with the addition of Kenley Jansen in the back end as the closer, they got Chris Martin, they got Julio Rodriguez. And, I'm very curious to see what this potential left-handed option can also bring as well. Another guy and Will Smith, who recently pitched for the Astros, appearing in 24 games with a 3.27 ERA, a FIP of 2.66. He's another guy who's a little bit on the later side, or the older side, excuse me. But, he has the ability and the experience and the track record of being able to be a very dominant reliever. Brad Hand is another guy as well who pitched for the Phillies, 2.80 ERA last season over 55 games. So, I think the Red Sox really need to evaluate their current payroll situation, figure out how they really want to utilize that money and allocate it towards, the bullpen. Also, we've seen them looking at catching option of Roberto Perez, maybe, another shortstop or middle infield option. So they didn't really need to sort of crunch the numbers and figure out how much money they're going to have at the end of this offseason when everything's all said and done.
Yeah. I mean, the two that you just mentioned, again, would be great fits for the Red Sox. And I think that you need some more left-handed relievers in that bullpen. That's not a question. That's something that they need to address. And I like the idea of Brad Hand. I think that much like the others, they are good fits. And I like what he's shown over the course of his career. Yes, these guys are older. They're on the older side. They're over 30, but if you are just kind of using 2023 as a bridge year, then whatever, like sign him to a 1 or 2 year deal. Maybe in 2024, you'll have more of a direction of this team. And this team can be good. But I just don't see them being better than the AL East teams or the teams in the AL East, because they've just been able to bolster every part of their rotation or their lineup throughout the entire offseason. So I like Brad Hand. Honestly, I'm all in on all these guys. If they were to sign one of those guys tomorrow, today, whenever, I'd be fine with it. Like, just go out and get someone at this point, because you need to fill a few more holes in that bullpen.
I think with Hand as well, he's in a similar boat as Matt Moore, where coming off of an impressive year, but prior to that, had a little bit of some inconsistencies we saw in 2021. He pitched for 3 different teams, and the last team that he pitched for in 2021 in the later part of the year was the Blue Jays. Had a 7.27 ERA over 11 games. So I'm curious to see if, sort of that inconsistency that we saw in 2021 and maybe the question marks that he has of his durability and his consistency going into 2023 could lower his price a little bit more, maybe in the middle of Moore and Chafin. But yeah, I completely agree. Either of these, any of those options that we mentioned, Smith, Moore, Chafin, as well as Hand, I'd be very interested in. Britton's another guy that you brought up. It did get reported that, he's going to have a throwing session in front of teams. So curious to see if, that continues to build up the suitors around him as well. But we're going to continue to look at some left-handed bullpen depth arms that the Red Sox have most recently signed to minor league deals over the last week or so. But before we do that, Lauren just wants to take a second to talk to you about Built Bar.
I love Built Bar. You all know this by now. And if you're looking for something that's a delicious treat, but you don't want all the fat and calories that can come with a candy bar at times, then you have got to try a Built Bar. The holidays are over. We're almost in February, and a lot of people's resolutions are eating healthier and making the gym a bit more of a priority. That's obviously one of mine. And you can eat healthier by having Built Bars. I absolutely love them. They do not taste like a protein bar. There's none of that cardboardiness that sometimes other protein bars taste like. And part of the reason that they do this is because they are covered in 100% real chocolate. So you get the good taste, you get that it's good for you, you get everything for you in a Built Bar. And their macros are absolutely incredible. So on top of being covered in 100% real chocolate, 130 calories, there's 4 grams of sugar and 17 grams of protein. And now you don't need to wait for a box to show up at your doorstep. They sell them now at Walmart. You can go right to your pharmacy section in your local Walmart, or if you're closer to a Sam's Club, they also sell them. You can get the 13 bar box and the 4 bar box at Walmart, 13 bar box at Sam's Club. And you can also still order at built.com if you are a patient person, but you can go check out all the flavors. My favorite, cookies and cream. They have double chocolate, the coconut puffs, coconut almond. There is a flavor for everyone. So do not wait. Head to Walmart, head to Sam's Club, head to built.com and get yourself some Built Bars.
So we brought up at the beginning of this episode the Red Sox willingness and interest in signing another left-handed option to their bullpen. And interestingly enough, the last 3 pitchers that they've signed to minor league contracts are all left-handed pitchers. Starting off with Ryan Sheriff, going into the 2023 season, he's going to be 33 and missed most of 2022 with bicep tendonitis. Curious to see how that really affects him over this next year, but posted an impressive 2.51 ERA with 11.3 K per 9 over 14 innings in AAA. And interestingly enough, last pitched in the majors with the Rays, amassing a 5.52 ERA over 16 games. My opinion, depth piece. That's, sort of how we labeled it going into this segment. And so I would expect him to start in Worcester, but we saw, especially with the injuries in the starting rotation, in the bullpen last year, pitching depth is something that you always got to try and build up on. And who knows how he could really essentially impact this Red Sox team down the line in the major leagues.
Yeah, low risk, high reward, right? So I'm excited to see what he can do. Of course, when you're talking about biceps and shoulders and elbows and anything to do with your pitching arm, you start to get a little nervous about how they'll be able to bounce back, what kind of performance they will put out on the field. But I am very excited to see what he can do. He seems just like a very lovely person on Twitter, even to the trolls. He's just having a good old time and seems like he's excited to be here. So I'm excited to see what he can do. Like you said, he'll probably start in Worcester. And that's, I love going to that ballpark. So any other excuse to get there and be able to see kind of what the Red Sox have in these, the prospects, the young guys, the newer / older guys. So I think that he could be a dark horse to going into the season, and I'm excited to see what he can do.
The reason I laugh when you brought up the trolls on Twitter is because I did see somebody like talking about like his stats and how he hasn't pitched in the majors in a few years, and he was just like, "It's great to meet you. I hope you have a great night." So,
Yep.
I just thought that was hysterical, and you're right. I love when players get signed by this team and immediately they start interacting with some different Twitter accounts and people on social media. I remember Zach Kelly, when he came on, he said that he always really enjoys when he signs with the team, getting to know the people that are not only fans but cover the team. I think that's the best way to go about it. Especially when trying to build up the trust of the fan base, especially in a city like Boston. And another guy who saw the Red Sox sign as well is Matt Dermody. He last pitched in the majors in 2017 with the Blue Jays, appeared in 23 games with a 4.43 ERA. But other than that, last season pitched in 20 games in AAA, starting in 13 over 75 innings, had a 3.74 ERA. And so this gives the Red Sox, sort of a long reliever option or a potentially starting option. Not to say that, if injuries essentially happen later or in the early parts of the season, that he would be the first option to slot into the rotation, but it gives the Red Sox a little bit more flexibility rather than a guy who has only had experience pitching as a relief arm.
Yeah, I mean, you can never have too much depth, right? I feel like the Red Sox have a lot of depth pieces, and just adding one more, I mean, whatever at this point. It's 2023 and we kind of seen what this team has been doing in terms of additions. So the more depth, I guess, the better. You never know how 2023 is going to go.
And probably the most interesting signing, somebody who, hasn't really, made impact in the higher levels, but, has really had an interesting comparison to Chris Sale with his unique arm slot, is Skylar Arias. He's a 25-year-old who spent 2022 as a relief pitcher for the Guardians High A, appearing in 24 games with a 3.91 ERA. I'd expect him to probably start in Portland and try to continue to work his way up. But, especially with Chris Sale most likely being able to meet this kid in spring training, maybe he can give him some pointers on how he's been able to have so much effectiveness with that arm slot. Also, maybe what he's learned in terms of injury wise, his preparation, how maybe Arias can find a way to avoid some of the injuries that Sale has had. Not maybe, falling on a bike.
Stay off the bikes, kid.
or like hitting his pinky with a ball, but, maybe, trying to avoid Tommy John surgery down the line. But curious to see what those different depth pieces are able to do throughout this season, sort of how the Red Sox continue to try and build up this bullpen. But we're going to continue to keep you updated about everything that's going on about the Boston Red Sox heading into spring training. If you have not yet, make sure to subscribe on whatever audio platform that you're listening to, or over on YouTube. Post 3 days a week, not only talking about, different signings or rumors like this. We also like to have different reporters, different players on to keep you updated about everything that's going on with the Red Sox, not only in the major league system, but also the farm system as well. But thank you so much, as always, for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. Now make your second listen Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow Locked On Red Sox on Twitter. It's LO_Red Sox. Myself, it's at Jake Iggy. And also Lauren, it's la 3 laws, Lauren with 4 R's. But we'll end it how we always end it. Let's keep the faith and let's go Sox. Peace.